Look, I'm pretty sure we talked about this story, but I see it coming up over and over, which kind of begs the question, typically when things keep coming up over and over, there must be some validity to it, something to it. So who better to talk about this than Dr. Chris Labos, cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology, who's joined us regularly here on CJAD 800. By the way, you can catch him on his own every Sunday on weekends with Joanne Vrakas here on CJAD, so you might want to check that out as well. So, Chris, the deal today, as I said, I believe we once touched upon this, MRI body, or let's call them body MRI scans. So people know about MRIs. Typically, you get it for a particular injury you have. You want to know how serious it is. This idea of a complete body MRI, first of all, where did this come from? Do you know?
Well, it came from some private clinics a few years back, and it gained popularity because a lot of celebrities sort of jumped on the bandwagon. And I mean, it's a very lucrative thing to do, especially if you're running a private business. But from the purely medical scientific standpoint, they really have no value. And there's been this perpetual, maybe battle is too strong a word, but you see it in these private clinics offering and marketing these tests that, they go after people who have insurance because, the insurance companies will pay for them. But they are very expensive tests that frankly have no value and are potentially even harmful in certain circumstances. And you have this sort of cyclical nature to this story where they sort of ebb and flow in popularity. And every so often a celebrity will say something and it'll become part of the news again. And this is what happens. But yeah, they've been sort of grumbling along for maybe about a decade now. When they became popular, they were first called executive physicals, and the way these private clinics would sort of market them, they would go to all these Fortune 500 companies and say, "Hey, bring your executives down, and we'll run them through the MRI machines." And the companies were like, "Hey, great, it'll make everybody feel better." But of course, very, very expensive.
Well, so let me go through a couple of those points. Number one, I was not aware insurance will cover this in the U.S., I guess, right? Is that the same issue here, or does it depend on the kind of insurance you have?
I mean, it kind of depends on the type of insurance you have, but because most insurance companies, the way most policies are written, they'll say, look, if you have a doctor who prescribes a scan, they're not always going to get into the nitty-gritty of is the scan necessary or not, because MRIs are, obviously very valid medical pieces of technology that we use all the time. So if you have a doctor who orders an MRI or there's a requisition that says do an MRI, they will do the MRI, and most insurance companies probably will cover it.
So now I'm looking at, I don't know if you saw the story, the one that's in Time, and I think the headline says it all, as you alluded to, right? A full body MRI scan could save your life or ruin it. Yeah. So where's the downside here?
Well, the downside is, here's the thing. You do a scan like this, they're going to see a nodule, they're going to see something. It's all the follow-up that comes after that. So you're perfectly fine. You have no symptoms. You do the MRI scan, they tell you that you have a cyst on your kidney. And you say, okay, and then you go for a biopsy, and the biopsy is inconclusive, so they send you for surgery. And I mean, the story that you had sent me about the guy in Time magazine, he was an ER doctor. He does this. They find a cyst on his kidney. He gets all freaked out, and he says, take it out. He goes there, and because they can't remove just the cyst, while he's under anesthesia, they take out his entire kidney. This guy lost the kidney because of an MRI scan that he didn't need. So the downside is, that's an extreme example, but the downside is first of all, it costs money. Second of all, you're going to get all these unnecessary tests. And eventually, if you do enough unnecessary tests, unnecessary procedures, eventually you will get a complication like losing a kidney that was perfectly fine and healthy.
In that particular case, just because there's a cyst there, in and of itself, that is not reason to panic, is it?
No, it's not. And that's the thing. All of us have, look, when you're young, you're biologically flawless, right? When you do scans on young people, they come back completely normal, and it's beautiful to behold. It's almost a work of art. But as we get older, all the little dings and, accumulated insults of life start to show up. So you see plaques here, cysts there, nodules there. Most of them are clinically insignificant. And that's the problem, is that you do these scans, you end up finding all these what are called incidentalomas, because they are that's actually a joke. They are incidental findings that don't actually mean anything. And that's the problem, because what happens, you go to these private clinics, you pay to do the scan, and then what do? They ship you back into the public system that then has to eat up all of its resources, essentially undoing all the anxiety that was caused to you by the scan that you didn't need, which showed equivocal findings that are not clinically significant.
Yeah, what's that term you use? That's a great term. Insignificant nomas?
Incidentalomas.
Incidentalomas. That's great. The other thing it does point out here, just because, you're doing an MRI, and we realize that MRIs are very good in certain cases, not necessarily for everything. Like if you have an organ that you mentioned, for example, kidney, if you have a liver issue or you have a gallbladder issue, maybe smaller stuff can be spotted, but bigger stuff, not always.
Well, right, and that's the thing. It's always a question of what are you looking for? Because here's the thing. People have this idea that it's sort of like Star Trek, right? You go through the scanner and then the machine will just tell you what's there.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously a lot of it's done with computers now, but people actually have to go and measure things. They have to look for things. So when you get this information overload, which is a scan from head to foot, people have checklists, right? They know what they're doing, but you can't look at everything simultaneously. So yeah, you can miss stuff. And also, not every scan is the ideal scan for the particular problem you have.
Right.
So if you go into this thinking, I want to find out if I have heart disease, yeah, the MRI is going to tell you if you have a structural abnormality of your heart, if your heart is the right size and all that. But frankly, I could have told you that by doing a simple ultrasound, which is a lot faster and cheaper. If you wanted to know if you have a blocked artery, you would have been better off doing a stress test. So MRIs are not the be-all and end-all scan for every conceivable situation either. And that's the problem. I think it lulls people into a false sense of security, because you could have a normal MRI scan, but if nobody bothered to do blood tests to find out if you're diabetic,
right,
you could be walking around with a high blood sugar that's not being treated.
I would just ask one last thing as we wrap up here. If you're going in with an injury, for example, right? Like I have a shoulder issue and I want to know what it is because it hurts, it doesn't go away. I've had a preliminary examination by, a doctor or whoever, an orthopedic surgeon. And I don't get an answer there with respect to, well, this is not life-threatening or there's nothing you can do, whatever. Am I wasting money to then go for an MRI? That's kind of what you're saying, to look for a more serious problem that was originally diagnosed as not a big problem?
Well, here's the thing. If you go in for an MRI of your shoulder specifically to find out if you have a rotator cuff injury, then that's one thing. These things they just shove you into the machine and they scan you head to foot for no reason, right? You walk into this exam perfectly fine saying, I want a checkup. And rather than going to a doctor who's going to measure your blood pressure, they just run you into the machine. So that's the real issue here. If you go for a focused scan for a specific reason, then that's fine. We can debate whether you actually need an MRI for your shoulder or not. But it's one thing to do a scan for a specific reason. It's another thing to get a full body scan just as a quote-unquote checkup.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, there's anxiety built into this, right? You come back with something you weren't expecting to get, that just be even almost as bad.
Yes, exactly. And then it's, a year doing other tests in the hospital system, which just eat up your time for no reason.
Always a pleasure. Chris, thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
My pleasure. You take care.
You bet. Dr. Chris Labos, you can check him out. He's here Sundays with Joanne Vrakas. Look, if you got nothing but money, even if you did, based on what he said, do you really want to go ahead and do that if you don't have a problem? Are you looking for a problem? Don't quite understand that.